America in the 1970s was a very different world. A world where kids rode their bikes without helmets, where a sunburn was seen as a sign of a great summer, and where cigarette smoke snaked its way into every family diner. It was a time of freedom, maybe a little reckless, when people lived slower, simpler, and rarely thought about safety or regulations. Today, let's go back to that decade to explore 25 things that used to be everyday American habits, but which might surprise us now or make us completely unbelievable that they ever existed. Hitchhiking. You might be surprised to know that hitchhiking was once seen as an adventure, not the risky behavior it is today. In the 1970s, people often stuck out their thumb with a smile, hoping for a ride and maybe an interesting story along the way. It was a popular way to get from one town to the next by placing trust in strangers, especially before cheap bus tickets and modern ride-sharing apps came along. From soldiers on leave, college students on break, to wanderers with a dream, they all relied on the kindness of strangers to get around. People didn't think much about pulling over to pick up a stranger, and parents might only warn their kids to be careful, without the deep anxiety we have now. It was even seen as resourceful and full of community spirit. However, over time, stories of attacks, disappearances, and crimes related to hitchhiking completely changed the public's perception. Laws were tightened, and no hitchhiking signs went up everywhere. Today, this practice is restricted or completely banned in many states. From a symbol of freedom and trust, hitchhiking became the source of unwanted troubles. No helmets while biking or skateboarding. The 1970s was the decade of absolute freedom on wheels, and the definition of that freedom was having no protective gear whatsoever. Kids rode bicycles with bright banana seats and long chrome handlebars without a second thought about head protection. Skateboards back then were just thin, hard plastic decks with narrow wheels, and kids would glide down hills without a helmet. Protective gear, if seen at all, was something you saw in a magazine, not in real life. Falling, scraped elbows, and bruised knees weren't accidents. They were an essential part of the game. Small injuries, the scars, were badges of honor, proving your courage and time spent playing outside. Sometimes 2 or 3 kids would even ride on one bicycle with no safety measures at all. Parents believed that letting their children freely explore and learn from their falls was the best way for them to grow up. In the 70s, this freedom was paramount. No one worried about laws or regulations. It was an innocence and recklessness that modern society would find hard to accept. Does today's overprotection take away a part of the freedom to explore and the resourcefulness that the previous generation once had? The sunbathing ritual. On the list of the most shocking habits from the 70s, the sunbathing ritual is perhaps the most incredible thing given modern health awareness. The goal for every girl and guy during the summer was to tan fast, tan deep, and tan dark, because everyone believed a tanned complexion was a healthy one. The ultimate summer ritual was lying out in the backyard, on the rooftop, or at the beach, armed only with a bottle of Johnson's baby oil and maybe a silver reflector under your chin. The baby oil was slathered on your skin to increase the shine, making your skin sizzle in the sun. The silver reflector's job was to beam the sun's rays straight onto your face like a heat lamp, making sure not a single spot was missed. Sunscreen, if used at all, was only SPF 4. No one listened to doctors' warnings about sunburns. Back then, achieving an even, healthy glow of a tan was nothing less than a badge of honor. Today, dermatologists plead with patients to stop tanning, and laws restrict minors from accessing tanning beds due to the undeniable link between UV exposure and skin cancer. This habit, which was once considered the standard for beauty and health, is now seen as extremely reckless and dangerous. Party lines. In the world of the 1970s, telephone privacy was a luxury. Instead of having a private line, you would share it with your neighbors. When you picked up the receiver, you might hear someone else talking. They could be a family down the street or people living next door. You had to wait your turn or politely ask if you could use the line if it was busy. If you were talking, you also had to accept that someone might pick up their receiver to check if the line was free. To tell the calls apart, each household was assigned a characteristic ringing code, such as 2 short rings or 1 long ring. When the phone rang, everyone in the house had to pay attention to figure out if it was their call. If you heard a ring that wasn't yours, you might listen in out of curiosity. The easy ability to eavesdrop on snippets of conversation led some people to become curious and listen longer than they should have. This often resulted in unexpected friendships or, conversely, minor neighborhood squabbles. Today, we have cell phones and end-to-end encrypted messaging apps. While modern technology offers absolute privacy, it also erased that sense of intimate community where everyone, whether accidentally or deliberately, knew about each other's lives. This shared connection, intrusive as it was a thread that bonded the neighborhood in the 1970s. Stores closed on Sunday. In today's 24/7 consumer society, we can buy anything at any time. But in the 1970s, this concept was almost non-existent. Stores closing on Sunday was a fixed part of life. Sunday was reserved for family, church, and rest. If you forgot to buy something on Saturday, you simply had to wait until Monday. There was no running out to the supermarket on Sunday night for that missing dinner ingredient. Downtown areas, which were bustling on weekdays, became eerily quiet on Sundays. Most department stores, hardware stores, and even many grocery stores were locked up. Only a few essential services like gas stations or some pharmacies were open. That stillness created a different rhythm for community life. It was time for big family meals, long walks, and impromptu neighbor visits. Today's 24-hour shopping world makes the idea of a completely closed Sunday almost unbelievable to the younger generation. But for the 70s generation, it was a guarantee of rest, a reminder that not everything revolved around consumption and work. This shift makes us wonder if we traded the quiet and quality family time for unlimited convenience. Smoking sections in restaurants. Smoking in restaurants in the 1970s was not a secretive or shameful act. It was a widely accepted social behavior, as common as ordering dessert. On every table, a thick glass or heavy metal ashtray was readily available. These ashtrays, sometimes decorated with the restaurant's logo, served as fixed table decorations. You could easily spot a cigarette vending machine standing right next to the entrance, near where the gumball machine or small toy dispenser was placed. When the host asked, "Smoking or non-smoking?" the answer was just a social formality, because no matter where you sat, the air always smelled faintly of smoke. Stepping into a diner was stepping into a haze of cigarette smoke. Waitstaff had to weave through the thick smoke to bring out dessert, sometimes even having to brush ashes away before setting the cake plate down. Children sat right there, innocently coloring on paper placemats, while smoke hung suspended right above their heads. No one thought it was strange. Families happily ate pancakes, while at the next table, someone laughed and lit a new cigarette. Back then, cigarette vending machines were placed right in front of the restaurant doors. This is a sight that would make anyone uneasy today, when you think about how children grew up surrounded by that smoke and no one saw anything wrong. Ashtrays on planes and buses. If smoking in restaurants was an accepted behavior, then smoking on public transit, especially planes and buses, was a characteristic travel ritual of the 70s. Ashtrays weren't an addition. They were a standard feature integrated right into the seat's armrest. They were always there, waiting to be flicked open with a small metal click, even if you weren't a smoker. On planes, the space was formally divided, the smoking section in the back and the non-smoking section in the front. However, because the air was filtered and circulated together, the smoke still drifted back through the passenger cabin. It's amazing to think that the no smoking sign only lit up during the most critical moments, like takeoff and landing. Otherwise, passengers were allowed to smoke mid-flight. On long-distance buses, the scene wasn't much different. Bus windows were often open just enough for the smoke to escape, while the built-in ashtrays full of gray dust were in constant use. Bus drivers also navigated in that atmosphere, and complaints were rare. Smoking during the trip became a type of relaxation ritual, helping long-haul passengers feel more at ease. Limited TV choices. In the 1970s, your world of entertainment was simple. There were only 3 or 4 TV channels, which meant choices were sparse, but somehow still enough. There was no scrolling through countless menus. You would turn the dial until something came on. Saturday mornings were for cartoons, evenings for family sitcoms, and if you missed a show, you had to wait months for a rerun. Watching TV required a bit of physical effort. If the signal was snowy reception, you had to adjust the rabbit ears antenna on top of the TV. It was a process that required patience and sometimes the coordination of the whole family. Sometimes one member had to stand in just the right posture in a corner of the room, holding their arm up to keep the antenna steady for a stable picture, while the other commanded the adjustment. "Stop right there! Don't move!" Having only a few channels created an unforeseen social bond. Everyone, no matter what town they were in, was watching the same program at the same time, creating a common topic of conversation the next morning. In today's era of fragmented content, it's hard to imagine an entertainment medium that could be so simple and have a shared rhythm that no one questioned. Now, we have countless options, but we seem to lack those shared, memorable cultural moments of the past. Film cameras and waiting for developing. In the 70s, the art of photography demanded patience and an appreciation for every recorded moment. With film cameras, you couldn't delete or check a photo after shooting. Every shot mattered because film and the number of exposures were finite and not cheap. You had to plan and think carefully before pressing the shutter button. After finishing the roll of film, you would drop it off at the pharmacy or camera store and had to wait a few days, sometimes a whole week. Half the fun of the process was the surprise. You never knew if the photo was blurry, if someone had their eyes closed, or if the lighting was good enough until you held the prints in your hands. People often flipped through them immediately, right there in the store parking lot, giggling at the failed shots or sighing with relief when they saw the clearly captured moments. Today, instant feedback from digital cameras and smartphones is taken for granted. In just a few seconds, you can shoot, edit, and share hundreds of photos. The shift from patiently waiting to instant gratification has diminished the appreciation for each frame. Every photo shot on film was a treasure, while digital photos are infinite and much easier to forget. Milk delivery. The milkman. In the early 1970s, the sight of glass bottles of milk filled in an insulated box on the doorstep in the morning was still a familiar image. The milkman usually arrived in the early morning, and the clinking of bottles was the sound signaling that breakfast was about to begin. The insulated box was designed to keep the milk cold, where you would find glass bottles with a layer of heavy cream settled on top. In the freezing winter, the liquid inside would sometimes freeze and push the carton or foil cap up like little towers of ice. That was a visual sign of just how cold it was. The milkman didn't just bring milk. They could also bring eggs, butter, or bread, turning them into a small social network. This delivery route created a close connection with neighborhood residents. The milkman wasn't just a salesman. They were often the one who shared neighborhood news and a familiar face that everyone trusted. This service gradually disappeared as large supermarkets emerged and offered cheaper milk. This convenience was replaced, but the satisfied feeling of seeing cold bottles of milk waiting by the door in the morning is a memory that modern technology cannot recreate. Payphones. In an era where cell phones are inseparable items, having to search for a payphone to communicate is almost unimaginable. But in the 1970s, the payphone booth on every street corner was the lifeline of communication when you were away from home. You always needed to carry some loose change. The metal booth offered a strange combination of privacy and public display. The booths often had glass walls and a heavy metal door that never quite closed completely. The smell of metal, paper, and sometimes cigarette smoke was part of the familiar experience. Long-distance calls felt especially important. You had to feed coins into the slot, and there was a characteristic clink of the coins dropping into the slot as your call time began to tick away. If you needed to find a number, the phone book hung on a chain inside the booth, with pages worn thin from repeated use. Now, seeing a payphone is extremely rare. They are only forgotten relics. They remind us of a time when calling someone meant having to find the nearest booth. It was a physical experience requiring effort, but it also brought satisfaction when a crucial call was completed. Home encyclopedias. In the age of Google, where every piece of information is just a few keystrokes away, it's hard to imagine having to flip through pages to find a single detail. But in the 1970s, a full set of encyclopedias on the shelf was a sign of pride and respect for education in many families. These sets were often purchased from door-to-door salesmen, and the heavy leather-bound volumes were neatly arranged on the living room shelf. When you opened them, you could smell the distinctive scent of paper and glue. They were carefully guarded treasures of knowledge. Students spent hours flipping through the pages to find details for school projects, and it was often an intellectual adventure. Owning a set of encyclopedias signaled a certain seriousness about education, and it was a large investment. Today, encyclopedias have been completely replaced, but back then, they were a symbol of intellectual authority in every home. We lost the physical interaction with knowledge, that satisfied feeling of finding the answer after flipping through hundreds of thin, rustling pages. Paper maps. Before GPS and smartphones could provide voice directions, paper maps were the necessary and indispensable tools for any long-distance road trip. Maps often lived in the car's glove box, becoming soft and wrinkled from repeated use. Unfolding a paper map was a major challenge. You spread them out into a giant rectangle, sometimes almost obscuring the view, and traced the routes with your finger. Parents would often argue gently about where to turn, while the map lay open on the dashboard under the car's dim lights. Folding them back neatly, returning them to their original state, was a challenge few people ever mastered. Maps weren't just tools, they were companions on an adventure. If you got lost, you had to pull over to the side of the road and patiently consult the map. Today's GPS would seem like an impossible miracle. The convenience of turn-by-turn directions eliminated getting lost, but it also erased a part of the adventure back then, which was finding your own way, relying on map-reading skills and instinct. Paper maps are a legacy of resourcefulness and self-reliance. Do you still keep a wrinkled paper map? Or do you remember the last time you had to stop the car and ask for directions instead of using your phone? Tell me about it in the comments below. In-person banking, no ATM. The 70s was a time when banks operated during strict business hours, and every transaction had to happen in person. Payday Friday meant a familiar sight, long lines snaking around the bank lobby. If you needed cash, you stood in line at the teller window. There was no convenience of a 24-hour ATM. Tellers often greeted you by name, remembering details about your last visit, creating a sense of intimacy and personalization. Everything was done by hand. Deposit slips and withdrawal forms were filled out manually. There was a sense of formality and seriousness in the bank space. The pen was always chained to the counter. Transactions were conducted face-to-face, requiring mutual trust between the customer and the banker. The convenience of today's 24-hour ATMs would have been completely unimaginable in a world where your money was only accessible during certain hours. We gained instant convenience, but lost the personal interaction, where the person managing your money actually knew who you were. The ATM replaced the teller with a machine, making things faster, but also colder. Manual TV controls, no remote control. In the 70s, TVs were bulky, heavy pieces of furniture, often called console TVs. And unlike today, if you wanted to change the channel, you had to actually get up and walk over to the set. The concept of a remote control was a luxury or not yet widespread. Kids often became the family's unofficial remote control, sent to change the channel during commercials. Changing the channel wasn't a lazy action, but a small exercise. You had to flip through each channel manually, hearing the loud, satisfying click of the rotary dial as it locked into the next channel. Besides channel changing, old TV sets also had physical dials to fine-tune the picture and sound. If the image was a bit fuzzy or off-color, you had to turn an actual dial to sharpen the picture. To get a better signal, you had to adjust the rabbit ears antenna on top of the TV. This physical interaction with entertainment has nearly disappeared today. The convenience of the modern remote control would have seemed like an unimaginably luxurious gift to the people of the 70s. Mechanical cash registers. The sound of the mechanical cash register was an indispensable part of every purchase transaction in the 70s. Cashiers used these cumbersome machines, which gave a distinctive sound to every purchase. Each key let out a loud clack as the price was manually entered, so accuracy depended entirely on the cashier's skill. After entering the amounts, pulling the lever tallied the total with a satisfying resonant ding. That ding was the signal that the transaction was finished. The mechanical cash register created a tangible rhythm. Change was carefully counted back into your hand, coins clinking one by one. The entire process was a small public performance at the end of every transaction. Today's barcode scanners and contactless payment devices are much faster and more accurate, but they lack the tangible charm and physical interaction that those old machines provided. The feeling of watching your cash being processed right in front of you, hearing the distinct clack and ding, is a connection to the transaction that we have lost in the digital age. Manual typewriters. Manual typewriters weren't just office equipment. They were the pulse of written communication in the 1970s. They filled the workplace with a steady clatter of keys. Each letter struck the page with a satisfying thump. The carriage return required a firm, deliberate push on the lever, accompanied by the familiar chime. The sound of a busy office was a mix of keystrokes, return bells, and the rustling of stacked paper. When you made a mistake, correcting it wasn't as easy as hitting the delete button on a computer. You had to reach for liquid correction fluid, liquid paper, or special correction tape, waiting for it to dry before you could type over it. Secretaries and typists often had faint gray graphite streaks on their fingertips from having to use carbon paper to create copies. Personal computers and word processing software swiftly replaced typewriters. Being able to correct mistakes without leaving a trace was a revolution. But manual typewriters gave a tangible feeling to the work. Every letter was created with force and determination, fostering a direct connection between the writer and the page that modern keyboards cannot replicate. Outdoor clotheslines. In the 1970s, outdoor clotheslines were as common as washing machines. Although electric dryers existed, nothing compared to the simple satisfaction of clothes flapping in the wind. This ritual was part of laundry day. You carried the wet, newly washed clothes out in a large basket, walked across the yard, and clipped them to the line using wooden clothespins. The wind turned shirts and dresses into dancing shadows, and you had to constantly check the weather because a sudden rain shower could ruin the whole day's work. Most importantly was the smell of sun-dried sheets, a pure and strongly evocative scent that no fabric softener could match. Towels, after being dried in the wind, became stiff and slightly rough, perfect for scrubbing yourself after a bath. Electric dryers brought weather-independent convenience, but they also took away a simple ritual that connected us to nature and provided a distinctive scent of cleanliness. The disappearance of the clothesline is a trade-off between convenience and the feeling of satisfaction from a job completed under the sun. Metal lunchboxes and thermoses. The cold metal lunchbox, with its accompanying thermos, wasn't just a food container. They were a child's badges of identity in the 1970s. The boxes were often decorated with images of your favorite TV show, cartoon, or movie, reflecting the owner's personality. You proudly carried it to school, the painted metal rattling softly as you walked. If you dropped the lunchbox, it would dent, and every dent on the metal box told a story about a playground fight or a silly accident. The smell inside was a unique and memorable blend of sandwiches, apples, and the slightly sour taste of warm milk from the thermos. The thermos inside had a small plastic cup that doubled as a lid where you could drink milk or juice. The clatter of multiple lunchboxes opening at once was the specific sound of school lunchtime. Today's soft, insulated lunch bags feel practical and easy to clean, but they lack the sturdy, story-filled presence of a metal lunchbox that stayed with its owner for years. The disappearance of the metal box is the loss of a material symbol of childhood where lunch was carried in a miniature piece of pop art. Drinking from the garden hose. Drinking water directly from the garden hose was the purest summer refreshment in the 70s. It was a simple habit. No one worried about germs, only about hydration and the sheer joy after playing. You turned on the faucet, letting the initial hot water that had accumulated in the rubber hose run out. Then, you took a long gulp of cold water, bending down and trying to drink straight from the spout. The water tasted slightly metallic with a hint of rubber from the hose, but it was always surprisingly welcomed. The shock of ice-cold water after the initial heat was part of the thrill. The garden hose was the center of outdoor activity. It could turn into a fountain, a water gun, and sometimes an impromptu sprinkler system for running through. Friends took turns passing the hose, sharing this refreshment without worry. In an age before bottled water was common, the hose was as reliable as the sun on a summer day. Today, apprehension about tap water quality and the prevalence of bottled water have made this habit almost disappear. That habit showed a trust in the environment and a carefree nature that the younger generation today struggles to have. Telephone directories, white and yellow pages. Before the internet, every home in the 70s had at least a thick telephone directory. It was usually in two parts, white pages for personal listings and yellow pages for businesses. Using the phone book was an exercise in patience and alphabetical order. You flipped through the white pages by last name, then first name, to find a number. The thin pages rustled as you carefully turned them. The book had a subtle, distinct scent of ink, and that smell often lingered on your fingertips. The yellow pages were full of colorful advertisements, many of which had coupons. This was the only way to search for a plumber or a new pizza place. The phone book was also handy for many other purposes, such as boosting a child's seat or propping open a door. Now, the idea of searching for something without typing it into an internet search bar feels like a relic from another world. Finding a number took more time, but it felt rewarding when you finally located the information you needed. The disappearance of the phone book is a clear sign of how information shifted from being tangible to being instantaneous. Manual car controls. In the 1970s, driving was a much more physical experience, starting with how you interacted with the car itself. Manual car windows and door locks were simply how cars operated. There were no other options. If you wanted to roll the window down, you grasped the handle and crank it in a steady circle. For kids, rolling down the window was a small arm workout, especially on hot days. The driver had to lean across the seat to roll down the passenger side window or had to manually lock each door. The door locks made a satisfying click when engaged, a solid and reliable sound. Rolling the window down on a hot day filled the car with wind that messed up your hair. There was no automatic air conditioning. Today's push-button convenience is more streamlined and safer, but it eliminated those small tactile moments that defined commuting in the 1970s. It reminds us of a time when physical interaction was necessary to perform even the most basic actions. We've come a long way. What are your thoughts on today's convenience compared to life in the 70s? Share your reflections on this shift in the comments section. Manual food mill. Before electric blenders dominated, the manual food mill was a quiet champion in the 70s kitchen. It was a simple but incredibly effective tool that required arm strength and patience. Its design was straightforward: a bowl, a blade, a crank, and a sieve. By turning the crank, you could transform soft vegetables and fruits into smooth purees. When you used it, you felt connected to the process of preparing food. The manual food mill was ideal for making baby food, applesauce, mashed potatoes, and tomato paste. Seeds, skins, and lumps were separated, leaving a perfectly smooth mash. As technology took over, the manual food mill was gradually forgotten, replaced by fast and convenient electric appliances. This shift reminds us that sometimes food tastes better when it is made slowly, one turn at a time, with human participation. Its simplicity and effectiveness are a reminder of the value of manual tools in a world full of machines. These everyday habits, from the smoke in restaurants to trusting a stranger on the highway or those cold metal lunchboxes, are testaments to a different era. When did normal life begin to feel so unrecognizable, and what community connections or freedoms did we lose in the process? The past isn't meant to be denied, but rather serve as a foundational lesson for future development. If these memories have taken you back to your childhood, please like this video and subscribe to the channel so we can continue to share and preserve the nostalgic heritage of the 70s.